Imagine you were living in London before June 24, 2016. The iconic Big Ben chiming as you rush to work with a coffee in your hand. While it's true that it chimes today, as well as it did, say, 8 years ago, when the UK finally announced its decision to leave the European Union, however, there's an undercurrent of unease. Two-thirds of the British public believe that their economy has been devastated as a result of Brexit. Even from those who once championed the cause, only 1 in 5 see a positive impact. What happened to the grand vision of prosperity and sovereignty that was promised? Today, questions loom larger than ever. Has the UK truly benefited from its bold leap into the unknown? Join us as we peel back the layers of Brexit's impact, what went wrong, and where does the UK stand now? Let's take a look. If there's one word that can describe the promise of Brexit, it's bold. The promise of Brexit was bold. It painted a picture of a nation that was reclaiming control from the perceived restrictions of the EU. Brexit was a step towards a bright future with new trade deals and a more independent economy. Brexit was a new dawn. On June 24, 2016, 52% of the British public voted to leave the European Union. But the decision to leave the European Union wasn't made in a day. Now, the data collected by Professor Paul Whiteley and his team from the University of Essex is enlightening as it reveals the multitude of reasons for Brexit. For years, British citizens have weighed the pros and cons of EU membership. The promise of a prosperous economy, effective immigration control, and efficient public services seemed increasingly far-fetched. As discontent grew, many felt the EU was failing to deliver on these critical fronts. Then, in 2008, the recession came. Britain's slow economic recovery left many feeling disillusioned, and to be fair, neglected. So, Brexit came as a beacon of hope. Fast forward to 2010, when the Arab Spring happened, and the immigrants flocked to Europe. As is always the case, the influx of migrants increased fears and anxieties across the UK. With the austerity measures imposed by the EU, the dissatisfaction within the people increased. As countries like Greece and Italy struggled under these policies, Britain didn't remain immune. So, Brexit offered a lifeline, a chance to escape the economic stranglehold. The Leave campaign cleverly mobilized two groups: the respectable Conservatives, led by Boris Johnson, and the grassroots populists, led by Nigel Farage. This dual strategy was to create a broad base of support and unite diverse factions under the banner of Brexit. Now, as we stand at the edge of this narrative, what results has this decision borne? In the aftermath of the vote, statistics began to reveal the depth of the challenges ahead. According to the Office of National Statistics, the UK's GDP growth slowed to 1.3% in 2018, down from 2.4% in 2015. Trade with the EU saw a significant decline, with UK exports to the EU falling by 14% in the first quarter of 2021. Furthermore, net migration from the EU dropped to 58,000 in 2020, compared to 189,000 in 2015. However, that's not all there is on these fronts. But firstly, how does the economic landscape of Britain look as of now? Picture a 500-meter racetrack with no obstacles. An average runner would take 5 minutes to reach the end of the track. But if you add obstacles, like mud pits or walls to climb on the track, it would take an average runner up to 15 minutes to complete the race. Didn't the time increase by 3 times? This is exactly what happened to trade routes after Britain exited the EU, or something similar along these lines. Before Brexit, trading between Britain and the European Union was seamless. It was like cruising on a smooth highway. Goods and services moved effortlessly, and it benefited both sides. However, Brexit introduced new barriers. It turned the highway into a bumpy road filled with hurdles. One of these hurdles was the reintroduction of trade barriers between the UK and the EU. These barriers dreadfully affected Britain's trade performance. According to the Office for Budget Responsibility, the UK's trade intensity, trade as a share of GDP, has dropped by 12% since 2019, which is 2.5 times more than any other G7 country. This decline indicates a significant reduction in how much the UK trades relative to its economic size. But why did this happen? Well, one clear reason is the new non-tariff barriers introduced post-Brexit. Now, these aren't just about taxes on goods, but also include rules, regulations, and checks that goods must go through before crossing borders. Smaller firms, particularly those in manufacturing supply chains, have found these new hurdles especially challenging. For instance, a small toy company in Britain that once easily sent its products to kids across Europe now faces a maze of paperwork and extra costs, leading to a noticeable drop in exports. Interestingly, not all sectors have suffered equally. While the trade of goods has been weak, the services sector has held up relatively well. Services include consulting, financial advice, and tech support, areas where the UK has always been strong. When the pandemic hit, many of these services faced no problems transitioning to remote delivery. That's why their trade performance remained consistent. In fact, UK services exports were valued at over £320 billion in 2023. This included financial and business services. But of course, the situation isn't this straightforward. Some studies suggest that there hasn't been a dramatic fall in UK trade with the EU alone. This simply means that the UK exports to non-EU countries have also struggled a lot, showing that Brexit's impact is part of a much more complex picture affecting global trade. Then, there's another layer of complexity. You see, conventional trade models most of the time miss how Brexit also altered the UK's role in global supply chains. You can think of these supply chains as a network of factories, warehouses, and businesses all working together across borders. Brexit disrupted these networks and essentially caused delays and increased costs. In the end, it wasn't only Britain that was affected, but the whole world. This brings us to another immediate and noticeable impact of Brexit: the end of the free movement of people between the UK and the EU. However, before we get to that, if you've been enjoying the video so far, don't forget to give this video a thumbs up and subscribe to our channel for more. Before Brexit, EU nationals had the freedom to move to the UK and contribute to the workforce. In 2016, the net immigration from the EU was over 200,000 a year. Fast forward to 2023, and the numbers tell a different story. Net migration from the EU turned negative. This means that more people are leaving the UK for the EU than the other way around. In fact, in 2022, net migration from the EU was negative 51,000. Now, this decline means that the UK labour market is suffering. If you take the sectors like agriculture, hospitality, and construction, the ones that relied heavily on EU workers, you can see the shortages they faced in terms of labour. Increased prices and reduced outputs affected consumers and businesses. For instance, a report indicated that recent wage growth has been much stronger in sectors like finance than compared to these above-mentioned sectors. The reason was simple. The finance sector didn't depend on EU workers as much as the others. That's why they were directly hit by reduced migration flows. However, this narrative also takes an unexpected turn. Immigration from non-EU nations has sharply increased despite a decline in migrant flows from the EU. Following Brexit, the UK implemented a new immigration policy that was rather lax for non-EU citizens, but restrictive for EU citizens. Immigration from nations including China, India, and Nigeria surged as a result of this change. 85% of the long-term immigrants in 2023 were not EU citizens, with 253,000 of those immigrants being Indian. One of the primary reasons for this increase is a rise in international students. In the UK, the popularity of higher education has expanded, attracting a large number of non-EU students who often remain on to find work. 39% of non-EU immigrants traveled to the UK in 2023 for higher education. The graduate visa, which was implemented and allows international students to stay and work in the UK for 2 years after completing their studies, contributes to these statistics even more. This improvement on the immigration front, however, doesn't cover the lag on the investment front. How has Brexit impacted foreign investment in the UK? Imagine you're trying to build a grand castle, but every time you start constructing, the ground shifts beneath you. When it comes to investment, this is what the reality looks like for business in Britain. You see, Brexit introduced a lot of uncertainty. Now, businesses hate uncertainty because they can't do any planning. The UK had a steady increase in investment before the Brexit referendum in 2016. However, with the Brexit vote, all of that changed. Companies began to falter. They had no idea what was ahead for them. Would there be further obstacles to trade? What modifications may regulations make? Many firms refrain from investing in new initiatives, equipment, and training because of the uncertainty surrounding them. According to research, corporate investment in the UK decreased by 10% since the referendum compared to what it would have been if the UK didn't exit the EU. ONS data shows that corporate investment rose by 0.9% in the UK in the first quarter of 2024, but it was still 0.6% less than it was during the same time the year before. But what are the ramifications of this decline in investment? For starters, businesses expand more slowly when they don't make investments. This causes reduced employment and slower economic growth. However, the reasons for this drop in investment are much more related to Brexit. After Brexit, there was a significant increase in red tape. Brexit meant that British companies doing business with the EU now had to deal with a ton of paperwork. All of this resulted in a ton of delays that affected businesses' day-to-day operations. Import declarations have grown by 50%, while customs declarations for products exported have more than quadrupled. To add to this, many prominent business figures, such as Sir Richard Branson, have also taken note of the fact that the UK is becoming a less desirable location for investment due to the expenses incurred by Brexit red tape. The overall performance of company investment in the UK provides evidence for this assertion. According to research by the think tank UK in a Changing Europe, investment may have increased by almost 25% from its current level if it had followed its pre-referendum trajectory. Another sector impacted is foreign direct investment. The UK saw 985 FDI projects in 2023, up 6% from 2022, but still below the pre-Brexit levels of 2017. The UK's proportion of European foreign direct investment projects increased to 17.3%. However, this gain was mostly due to a rebound in digital investment, especially in Greater London, where FDI projects increased by 20% in 2023. The overall trend indicates a less dynamic investment landscape than previously, even though FDI initiatives in certain areas have increased. Businesses are now exercising greater caution due to the ongoing uncertainties and higher expenditures. Long-term effects on productivity and economic growth in the UK resulted from this. Research indicates that if corporate investment had continued on its historic trajectory, the UK's GDP might have increased by 1.3% in 2022. Now, if you found this video informative, don't forget to give us a thumbs up and drop a comment below.